Right around the time of the Oscars, there's always this glut of jokes surrounding Leonardo DiCaprio, who is basically 50 years old, yet constantly has this slew of early, mid 20-something girlfriends, and that's just how he rolls. That's his style. And there's always this stupid joke somebody's cracking, some comedian who thinks it's funny, and I guess it's a little bit funny when they make these jokes. But in light of this, there are always some articles appearing and people making comments. But I've noticed something different this time around concerning Leonardo DiCaprio and his ever-youthful girlfriends, and that is a few articles that are taking a different tone and discussing Leonardo DiCaprio and more broadly women in the sexual market in a different way than would be conventional. Traditionally speaking, and I don't mean traditional, but usually what you encounter when you have some older guy together with a 22-year-old, or in general, older men taking interest in women in their early 20s, is some strange combination of moral criticism, as well as the subtle and not so subtle implication that in fact is some form of the P word. So if you're 48 and your girlfriend is 20, that is quote unquote predatory somehow, right? Now, we all know that's not true, but that's the implication. Now, we all also know why women in particular make these claims, and the men who back them up, because they're basically simping. Because a woman who's 48 does not have the same buying power as a woman who's 20 or even a woman who's 28. And so women traditionally have engaged in this type of verbal sniping to gain leverage when they otherwise wouldn't be able to. And that's just what this is. So Amy Schumer made this stupid joke recently about Leonardo DiCaprio, and so it goes and so it goes. And honestly, when women express this, it's coming from a place of envy. They wish they could be that young again, but they can't. And some of these articles that have cropped up are interesting because some of them have taken note of the fact that we all have an expiration date, but in particular, the expiration date for women is a little bit earlier than it is for men. Now, I know there's been a lot of commentary in recent years about how the wall is just an illusion and it's not real and women get men all the time and any time. And that is sort of technically true. So let's talk about what the wall actually is. The implication of the wall is not that a woman hits some magical number that's demarcated on a cosmic map and thereafter she has no possibilities and no options. That's not how it works. For one thing, it's gradual. Some women age better than others due to a combination of genetics and how they've taken care of themselves. And another thing is, although some people might claim the wall is that magic demarcated number etched into a cosmic map, it's more about the fact that the wall indicates, and the wall, roughly speaking, is 30 upwards, right? Roughly speaking. But really accelerates post 35 for women. This idea that women simply have fewer options. It's not that women have no options post-wall. It's that their options are fewer. And you can look at basically every graph in existence, and that bears this out. And so some of these articles that I've checked out recently have acknowledged this in part. So the more youthful women still in their 20s acknowledging that they have it good right now, but down the line it will become more and more difficult. Not that they have no options, that's not the point, it never was the point, but rather that the options become more limited. That's in stark contrast, obviously, to men, in which case, many cases, in fact, they will have no options whatsoever. Not that their options become more limited over time. So in a sense, women are like this great reservoir of water, but over time the reservoir shrinks and becomes more and more limited, whereas sometimes men never had any water to begin with. But what does this mean for women specifically? It means, and I've talked about this before, that if they don't capitalize on their youth and looks in early age, the options won't be there for them. And there is a lot of interference that's being run right now by the environment, by women's own psychology, by human psychology, that prevents them from realizing this. These days, it's a lot easier to persist in the delusion that you will forever remain youthful and you will forever remain good looking. That just isn't the case, even with the best plastic surgery, which can help. It's just not possible, not eternally at least. And social media, of course, makes us even more distracted, so we're even less inclined to think about that aspect of things, the aspect of aging. But the difference between men and women, this is a very important point, I think, is that men are often content with good enough. So a guy who might want to settle down would be okay with a girl who's pretty enough, decent looking enough that he wants to bonk her, and who's quiet, doesn't argue with him all the time, basically gives him peace and quiet, and is okay to hang out with every now and then. That would be a quote-unquote good partner for a lot of guys. The laundry list of unticked boxes that you often see on these checklists that women have generally doesn't exist for men. Probably exceptions, but most men don't have that. And so women, by not trying to think about this difficult question about their own expiration date, are potentially condemning themselves to great unhappiness. And I've talked about this before, and that is women are so locked down in their own psychology, the psychology that was born out of evolutionary pressure and biology, that they would rather be single for the rest of their lives or have cats than to settle down with a guy who's just good enough. That is female hypergamy. That is the general mentality of women. So the stakes aren't, as is often claimed, they won't get anything. It's just they don't want anything that's just okay or good enough. There is no equivalent of, oh, she's kind of pretty and I don't mind bonking her every now and every now and then we'll hang out, and she doesn't argue with me, she's not aggressive, and that's cool. There's no equivalent of that in women land. So really my interpretation of some of these articles that have cropped up in commentaries is that women are kind of coming to terms with their own reality that if they don't work on this quote-unquote problem when they have the power they do have, so let's say peak 18 to 25, and of course you can still do something between 25 and 30, but peak 18 to 25, then down the line they potentially will not be quote-unquote happy, whatever that nebulous term even means. And so there is, I've noticed this slow realization that the party doesn't go on forever. Or if it does, the quality of the party drops precipitously over time. Remember, women's choice is not the same choice as men. Men just have fewer options, especially average guys. Women's choice is good enough, which they don't like, might as well be alone, versus that is what I want, and even then they're not even entirely sure. So is this evidence that there's some major change going on in basic female mentality, as a few people have indicated or suggested? Probably not. I think that women, as we know in most cases, still continue to believe, at least nominally, that at age 42 they're just as good looking as they were at age 22. And I think you can boil a lot of that down to a kind of internal psychological trick of the mind that they play with themselves. This is also when you hear how they have a lot of education, or they've traveled a lot, or they have interesting experiences. You also hear a lot of the admonishments about men going for these younger, less experienced women because they're just not as interesting, or the accusations of predatory behavior. Or another one I find quite interesting is that men are afraid of wise, experienced women. That's why they don't go for them. Whereas the reality is it just comes down to basic biology. Men like young, hot women, and if you're a 50-year-old guy that can secure a 23-year-old girlfriend like Leonardo DiCaprio, why wouldn't you do that? At least if you're not looking for something long-term, right? And that's just how the cookie crumbles. The cookie crumbles for everyone. You know? If you're short, especially as a guy, the cookie is crumbled for you in a certain way. If you're bald, the cookie is crumbled for you in a certain way. If you're a woman, well, your expiration date is, in fact, more salient than the expiration date of a man, because a man can, to some degree, compensate with resources, but resources don't mean anything to men. There was never a man in history, I think, who said, wow, you're such a skilled and shrewd investor. I love the way you arrange your stock portfolio, and I love the way you make investments. It just turns me on. Such a guy presumably doesn't exist. It was ever thus and thus will ever be, but I don't think, despite some commentary on this and some articles, that this is indicative of some broad trend in female behavior. I think things are going to stay the way they're going to stay, largely speaking, and women are still going to be trapped in their unfortunate little delusions about their own age and their own ability to affect change upon their own realities. So, yeah, that's my take at least. As always, thank you for tuning in. Please hit the like button, comment, subscribe, share, all that YouTube jazz. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. Enjoy your weekend. May the gods watch over you. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.